The concrete mixer's drum had been turning wrong all morning, not the rhythm you want when you're pouring a foundation in 97-degree Texas heat. I could hear the bearings grinding from 50 yards away, metal on metal, the kind of sound that tells you equipment failure is coming whether you're ready or not. That's when Wade Phillips walked up with the folder. Friday afternoon, 3:47 p.m. I remember the exact time because I was checking my watch, calculating how much concrete we could pour before the heat made it unworkable. Wade handed me that folder without saying a word. Inside was an organizational chart with my name gone. Chloe Martinez's name was in my box. She'd been on her first real job site exactly 11 times. I counted. I'm Garrett Brennan, 49 years old, and I've been working construction since I was 25. Started right out of the Marines, learned everything hands-on. 4 years in the Corps taught me that systems work when everyone knows their job and does it right the first time. 24 years in construction taught me that the same rules apply whether you're building a barracks or a warehouse. I set the folder down on my hard hat and walked back to the concrete pour. The mixer's bearings were getting worse. That grinding sound louder now. In 30 minutes, we'd have a breakdown and 40 cubic yards of concrete setting up in the truck, but that wasn't my problem anymore, apparently. Wade was standing near the grade stakes with Chloe, both of them holding coffee like they were at a company picnic, instead of watching a foundation pour go sideways. She had her MBA and a smile that looked good in boardrooms. What she didn't have was any idea how to read the stress fractures forming in the concrete or why that mixer sounded like it was eating itself alive. I'd been training her for 6 months, showing her the safety protocols I developed after watching 3 near misses turn into close calls. The subcontractor relationships that kept our projects on schedule and under budget. The quality control checklist that eliminated callbacks and kept clients happy. She took notes, asked smart questions, and apparently decided my position looked better than her project coordinator role. When I reached them, Wade handed me an envelope. "Thanks for mentoring Chloe," he said. "She's really absorbed your systematic approach to project management." My systematic approach. That's what we were calling 24 years of keeping buildings standing and workers safe. Now, systems thinking, data-driven construction management, operational excellence. I opened the envelope while they watched. Inside was a performance review and a lateral transfer to senior site advisor. Same pay, less authority, and a desk instead of field oversight. They wanted me to document my processes for Chloe, create training manuals and procedure guides, then step aside quietly into an advisory role. I folded the papers and put them in my back pocket. "When does this take effect?" "Monday morning," Wade said. Chloe's got some exciting efficiency initiatives planned for the commercial division. Efficiency initiatives using the protocols I'd spent years developing. The safety procedures that kept our incident rate under 0.3%, best in the region. The supplier agreements I'd negotiated personally with handshakes and delivered promises. All of it would get rebranded as Innovative Construction Management Solutions. My wife Diana had been expecting this promotion for months. We talked about it over dinner, planned what the extra money would mean. Josh's last semester at A&M was coming up. Alex was looking at colleges, talking about engineering like his old man. The promotion would have meant financial breathing room, maybe paying off the house early, setting something aside for retirement. Now I'd have to drive home and explain why 24 years of dedication wasn't enough. Why some MBA with 6 months of site visits and a PowerPoint presentation was considered more qualified to run operations than someone who'd been solving real construction problems since before she graduated high school. But here's what they didn't know. For the past 8 months, I'd been having conversations with Roy Henderson, who runs a family construction operation about 40 miles south. Started as supplier meetings when we needed specialty concrete work, turned into something more when Roy mentioned he was looking for experienced project leadership. Roy appreciated old-school reliability over organizational charts and strategic planning sessions. He'd built his company the same way I'd built my reputation, one project at a time, one promise kept at a time. When you shake hands with Roy Henderson, you're making a deal that means something. That afternoon, I cleaned out my site trailer methodically. 24 years of documentation, subcontractor contact lists, safety improvements, and project troubleshooting guides went into boxes. Not because I was bitter, but because it was mine. Developed on my own time with my own experience, knowledge that had never been formally documented in Phillips construction systems. The safety protocols I'd created after watching preventable accidents almost happen. Personal notes based on 2 decades of watching equipment fail and learning the warning signs. the subcontractor relationships that got us priority scheduling and bulk pricing, built through delivered promises and consistent payment terms. The quality control processes that eliminated our callback rate through trial and error and constant refinement. I left copies of the official company procedures, the generic forms and standard checklists that any construction manager could follow. But the real knowledge, the experience that made those procedures work in real-world conditions, that walked out with me in those boxes. The concrete mixer finally seized up at 4:15. Bearings gone, 40 yards of concrete hardening in the drum. Chloe was on her phone, probably calling the rental company to complain about equipment failure. What she didn't understand was that good equipment maintenance prevents failures. You listen to the sounds, watch the performance, catch problems before they become disasters, but that wasn't my responsibility anymore. Monday morning, Chloe would move into my trailer, hang up her nameplate, and start implementing her efficiency initiatives. She'd learned the difference between theory and reality, one expensive mistake at a time. I loaded the last box into my truck and drove home to tell Diana our plans had changed. Diana was in the kitchen when I got home, grading papers from her third-grade class. She looked up when she heard my truck in the driveway, earlier than usual for a Friday. I could see the question in her eyes before I even walked through the door. "They gave it to Chloe," I said, setting my hard hat on the counter. Effective Monday, she put down her red pen and really looked at me. 24 years of marriage, she knew when something had shifted. The MBA girl. The MBA girl. Diana was quiet for a long moment, processing. We'd been counting on that promotion, not just for the money but for what it represented. Recognition for all those years of getting up at 5 a.m., coming home with concrete dust in my hair, missing family dinners because a pour ran late or a safety inspection couldn't wait. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to call Roy Henderson." Josh walked into the kitchen then, home from college for the weekend. 22 years old and studying civil engineering at A&M, he'd spent summers working construction crews since he was 16. Kid had good hands and better instincts, understood that blueprints were just suggestions until you saw what the ground was actually like. "Dad, you okay?" he asked, reading the room. "Sit down," I told him, "both of you. Let me explain what just happened." I spread the folder contents on the kitchen table. The org chart, the performance review, the lateral transfer documents. Josh studied them like he was reading structural drawings, following the logic from one decision to the next. "This is stupid," he said finally. "You built half the commercial buildings in this county. That's not how corporate thinks," I said. "They want innovation, fresh perspectives, data-driven optimization." Deanna picked up my hard hat, turned it over in her hands. "Roy Henderson, the one with the family company, 3 generations of builders. His grandfather started with residential. His father moved into commercial. Roy's been running it for 15 years. Good reputation, solid projects, smaller operation." Josh asked, "Much smaller, maybe 40 employees, but they're profitable, growing steady, and Roy values experience over credentials." I'd met Roy 8 months earlier when Phillips needed specialty concrete work on a medical building foundation. Roy's crew handled the technical pour, stayed on schedule, cleaned up after themselves. Afterward, Roy and I got to talking over coffee, one construction professional to another. "You ever think about making a change?" he'd asked that day. "I'm looking for someone who understands operations, knows the trade inside and out." At the time, I'd laughed it off. I had 24 years invested in Phillips, seniority, reputation. Why would I start over somewhere else? Now I knew why. Diana squeezed my hand across the table. "Call him." Monday morning, Chloe moved into my site trailer with a fresh nameplate and a whiteboard, covered in MBA buzzwords, synergistic optimization, data-driven efficiency metrics, lean construction methodologies. She called an all-hands meeting at 7 a.m. to introduce her vision for the commercial division. "We're going to revolutionize our approach," she announced to the crew. "Garrett built a solid foundation over the years, but it's time to move beyond traditional methods and embrace innovation." The crew supervisors looked at each other. Steve Cooper, who'd worked with me for 14 years, just shook his head. These guys knew the difference between PowerPoint slides and reality. They'd seen what happened when theory met Texas clay and summer heat. I spent that morning in my new cubicle, writing transition documents and procedural guides. Standard operating procedures that anyone could follow, generic enough to pass legal review. The real knowledge, the institutional memory that made those procedures work, that stayed in my head. By Wednesday, the first cracks appeared. Literally, The warehouse foundation we'd been pouring when I got demoted had developed stress fractures. Not hairline settling cracks, but actual structural deficiencies that required engineering review. Chloe had followed the standard concrete specifications without accounting for our specific soil conditions. Standard procedure called for 4,000 psi concrete. Experience told you to spec 400-500 psi for the clay composition we were dealing with, because Texas clay shifts with moisture and temperature changes. I'd learned that lesson 15 years earlier on a similar project, when 4,000 psi concrete cracked and we spent $30,000 on remediation. They poured at 4,000 psi. The foundation showed stress fractures within 48 hours. Steve texted me from the site, engineering firm on site, talking about tear out and repour. Chloe's in Wade's office explaining why the specs were wrong. The specs weren't wrong, the application was wrong. But that's the difference between following procedures and understanding why those procedures exist. Thursday brought another problem. Santos Ready Mix, our primary concrete supplier, called for a formal meeting about delivery schedules and pricing terms. Yeti Santos had been flexible with us for years because of personal relationships built over time. Chloe scheduled a conference room meeting with contracts and presentations. She wanted to optimize vendor relationships and implement strategic sourcing protocols. Eddie called me directly instead. Garrett, what's going on over there? This new manager wants to renegotiate everything. Says the old arrangements weren't properly documented. I'm not involved anymore, Eddie. Well, that's a damn shame. You always kept your word, paid on time, treated our drivers with respect. This MBA lady, she's talking about performance metrics and vendor scorecards. Edie Santos had been in the concrete business for 30 years. His father started the company, built it on handshake deals, and delivered promises. When supply chains got tight or weather delayed deliveries, Eddie took care of contractors who'd been straight with him over the years. I'll honor existing contracts, Eddie told me, but don't expect any special accommodations going forward. No more priority deliveries during concrete shortages. No more bulk discount pricing. Everything by the book. By Friday of that first week, project efficiency had dropped 25%. Material costs jumped because they were using generic supplier relationships instead of the personal partnerships I developed. Two key subcontractors informed Wade they wouldn't be bidding on future Phillips projects. Steve's updates got more frequent. Poured 3 yards short yesterday because Santos wouldn't send another truck. Chloe says we need to improve our ordering accuracy. Ordering accuracy wasn't the issue. Relationship management was the issue. When you've worked with a supplier for 15 years, when you've helped them through payment delays, and they've helped you through supply shortages, you build trust that goes beyond contractual terms. But trust isn't something you can put in a PowerPoint presentation or measure with performance metrics. That Friday afternoon, I drove out to Henderson Construction's main office. Roy was expecting me. Roy Henderson's office sat above the equipment yard, windows looking out over dozers and excavators lined up like they were ready for inspection. The man himself was 58 years old, built like someone who'd spent time swinging hammers before he started signing paychecks. His handshake still had calluses. Coffee? He asked, pointing to a pot that looked like it had been brewing since dawn. Thanks. We sat across from each other at a table covered with project plans and equipment maintenance schedules. Roy ran his operation hands-on, the kind of owner who knew which machines needed service and which jobs were running behind schedule. Heard what happened at Phillips, he said. Wade's loss is someone else's gain. You still looking for operations management? I am. But let me be straight with you, Garrett. This isn't Phillips Construction. We're not big enough for fancy titles or corporate politics. You'd be working with 40 people, not 200. Projects run smaller, profit margins run tighter. What kind of projects? Roy spread out blueprints for a medical office complex, a retail strip center, and a warehouse expansion. Commercial work mostly. Some industrial. We bid jobs we know we can build right, not jobs that look good on quarterly reports. I studied the plans. Clean designs, practical layouts. The kind of construction that focused on function over flash. What's your average project size? 500 kilocalers to $3 million. Occasionally something bigger if the client's right and the timeline works. Crew experience? Most of our guys have been with us 5 years or more. My foreman averaged 15 years in the trade. We don't hire fresh graduates and hope they figure it out. Roy poured more coffee and leaned back in his chair. Here's my question for you. You've been working for a corporate outfit for 24 years. Can you adjust to family business mentality? What's family business mentality? Decisions get made by people who live with the consequences. We don't have shareholders or private equity partners. When we bid a job, we're betting our own money that we can deliver what we promise. I thought about Wade Phillips, who answered to regional managers, who answered to corporate executives who'd never set foot on a construction site. Decisions made in conference rooms by people who measured success with spreadsheets instead of finished buildings. I can adjust, I said. Good. Because I've got a shopping center project starting next month. 18-month timeline, $208 million budget. The kind of job that can make or break a company this size. Roy walked me through the project details. Ground-up construction, 45,000 square feet of retail space. Anchor tenant already signed. The client was a family development group that had worked with Henderson Construction on previous projects. They chose us over Phillips, Roy said. Liked our approach better. What approach? We show up on time, build what we promise, clean up after ourselves, and don't charge for changes we should have caught in the planning phase. Roy offered me operations director position at $145,000 base salary, plus performance bonuses. More importantly, he offered 15% equity stake after a 2-year buy-in period. Not just employment, but ownership in the success I helped create. I'll need 2 weeks to finish transition work at Phillips, I said. Take your time. I want you starting here with a clear head and no obligations. We shook hands on the deal, no contracts, no legal review, no HR department approvals. Just 2 construction professionals who understood that business gets done between people who keep their word. When I got home that evening, Diana was in the backyard with Josh, both of them looking at the deck he'd been planning to rebuild. 22 years of Texas weather had warped the boards and loosened the railings. Dad, Josh called out, "Come look at this. I think we can salvage most of the frame structure." I walked over and examined the support posts, pressure-treated lumber, properly spaced, foundations still solid. Josh was right, the bones were good. Just needed new decking and railings. You spec'd the materials yet? I asked. Josh pulled out a notebook with measurements and material calculations written in the careful block letters engineers learn to use. Composite decking, aluminum railings, stainless steel fasteners. Should last 20 years. Why composite? Less maintenance. Mom won't have to stain it every 2 years. Deanna smiled. Smart boy. I looked at Josh's calculations, checking his math and material specifications. The kid had good instincts, understood that building something right the first time saved money and headaches down the road. When you graduate, I said, you thinking about construction management? Maybe. Depends on what kind of opportunities there are. Roy Henderson's got a family operation about 40 miles south. 3 generations of builders. They might be interested in a young engineer who understands practical construction. Josh looked up from his notebook. You took the job, I took the job. Diana squeezed my shoulder. Good. Phillips didn't deserve you anyway. 2 weeks later, I cleaned out my cubicle at Phillips Construction for the last time. Steve Cooper helped me carry boxes to the truck. Wish I could go with you, he said. This place is falling apart. What's the latest? Santos pulled out of the concrete supply contract, said they're tired of dealing with payment delays and scheduling changes. Chloe's scrambling to find replacement suppliers. Payment delays, new accounts payable procedures. Everything has to be approved by 3 people now. It takes 45 days to cut a check for materials that used to be paid in 10 days. Eddie Santos had built his concrete business on cash flow and reliable partnerships. When contractors paid quickly, he offered better pricing and priority delivery. When payment terms stretched out to 45 days, he treated you like any other customer. What about the warehouse foundation repairs? $65,000 and counting. Engineering firm says we need to tear out the whole north section and re-pour with proper specifications. The foundation I'd warned them about. The soil conditions I'd tried to explain. The 4,500 psi concrete that would have prevented the whole problem for an extra $3,000 in material costs. Chloe still blaming inherited inefficiencies. She's blaming everything except her own decisions. Wade's starting to ask hard questions. I started my truck and looked back at Phillips Construction one last time. 24 years of my life in that building. Relationships built, problems solved, projects completed, but that was yesterday's story. Tomorrow morning, I'd walk into Henderson Construction as operations director, responsible for real projects with real consequences. The shopping center job was scheduled to break ground in 10 days. Henderson Construction ran different than Phillips, no morning meetings about strategic initiatives, no weekly reports on optimization metrics. Roy walked the job sites at 6 a.m., checked progress, talked to foremen, made decisions that mattered. The shopping center project started exactly on schedule. Site prep, utilities, foundation work. My first month there, we stayed on budget and ahead of timeline. The crew responded to clear direction and consistent management. When problems came up, we solved them on-site instead of scheduling committee meetings. But Phillips Construction was having different kinds of problems. Steve's updates got more serious as weeks passed. The warehouse foundation repairs had turned into a complete rebuild, $95,000 over budget and 6 weeks behind schedule. The client was threatening contract termination and penalty clauses. Chloe hired another consulting firm. Steve texted, "Going to analyze our operational workflows and recommend process improvements." Same processes I'd built over 24 years, now being reverse engineered by consultants who charge $250 an hour to tell Phillips what they'd thrown away when they demoted me. Then came the call that changed everything. Wade Phillips's number showed up on my phone at 7:15 on a Thursday morning, 3 months after I'd joined Henderson. "Garrett, we need to talk. Can you come in today?" I could hear desperation under his professional tone. Project delays were becoming cost overruns. Client complaints were turning into contract cancellations. The board was asking questions Wade couldn't answer. "I've got 30 minutes at 2 p.m., I told him. When I walked into his office that afternoon, Wade looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 months. Chloe was there too, laptop open, looking defensive. "We're experiencing some operational challenges," Wade began. "Transition difficulties. We were hoping you might consult on some technical matters. They wanted to hire me back as a contractor to fix the problems created by replacing me." "What kind of technical matters?" I asked. Chloe jumped in. "We're having structural reliability issues and supplier relationship complications. Your institutional knowledge could help us optimize our troubleshooting protocols." Institutional knowledge, supplier relationship complications. She was describing the collapse of everything I'd built, using MBA language to avoid admitting they'd made a mistake. "You want me to fix the problems you created by getting rid of me?" I said. Wade shifted uncomfortably. "It's not that simple, Garrett. We value your expertise. We're prepared to offer competitive consulting rates." "What rates?" $200 an hour. Short-term basis. I almost laughed. They were willing to pay me $200 an hour to rebuild systems I'd maintained for years at my regular salary. And when I finished, Chloe would get credit for turning around operational challenges. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I'm not available." Wade's face went pale. "Garrett, be reasonable. We can work something out." "I'm being reasonable," I said. "You decided you didn't need my expertise. Turns out you were wrong. That's not my problem anymore." I left that meeting knowing Phillips Construction was finished. Equipment failures were constant. Costs were climbing. Client satisfaction was dropping. Their solution was throwing consulting dollars at problems that required experience. At Henderson Construction, we were landing new projects every month. Word spreads fast in construction. Clients talk to other clients. Suppliers compare notes. When you deliver what you promise, on time and on budget, people remember. The shopping center project finished 2 weeks early and $50,000 under budget. The client was so impressed they offered us their next development project, a $4.2 million office complex. Roy called me into his office the day we got that contract. "Garrett, I've been thinking about succession planning. My son's more interested in law school than construction. Would you consider becoming my partner?" Partnership, not just employment, but ownership in the success I helped create. "What would that look like?" I asked. 40% equity stake after a 3-year buyout period. "We restructure as Henderson and Brennan Construction. You handle day-to-day operations. I focus on business development and client relationships." Henderson and Brennan Construction. My name on the building, on the trucks, on the business cards. After 24 years of making other people wealthy with my expertise, someone wanted to share the ownership I'd earned. That evening, I called Josh at college to tell him about the partnership offer. "Dad, that's incredible," he said. "Your own construction company, not just my own. Roy's been building this for 15 years, but it'll be mine too in a way that matters." "What about Phillips? What happened to them?" Steve says they filed Chapter 11 last week. Private equity firm is selling off the equipment and real estate. 24 years of building something solid, destroyed in 8 months by people who confused credentials with capability. But that was their story, not mine. You know what the best part is? I told Josh, when you graduate, if you want to work construction, you'll have a family business to join, something we built together. Josh was quiet for a moment. I'd like that, Dad. 3 months later, the sign went up. Henderson and Brennan Construction. My name in letters 3 feet tall, visible from the highway. 49 years old, and finally building something that belonged to me. Diana drove out to the job site the evening they installed the sign, brought coffee in a thermos, and sat with me on the tailgate of my truck. We watched the sun set behind the office complex we'd just completed, golden light reflecting off windows we'd installed, parking lot we'd paved, landscaping we'd finished that morning. 24 years at Phillips, she said. Was it worth it? I thought about that question. All those early mornings, missed dinners, weekends spent solving other people's problems, building wealth for shareholders I'd never met while my own family waited for financial security that never seemed to come. It was training, I said finally. Everything I learned there, I'm using here. The difference is, now it's building something for us. My phone buzzed. Text message from Josh. Dad, just saw a photo of the sign on your company website. Looks good. Can't wait to work with Henderson and Brennan Construction someday. I showed Diana the message. She smiled and squeezed my hand. A certificate tells you what the code says, I said, watching the last light fade behind our completed project. 24 years tells you what the code missed. Tomorrow morning, I'd walk into Henderson and Brennan Construction as a partner, not just an employee. Real ownership in the success I helped create. Projects with my name on them, built to last long after I'm gone. Some revenge is loud and dramatic. Some revenge is quiet and builds equity. One successful project at a time.